You are the Son of Heaven, the divine embodiment of imperial authority, the ruler of millions. And yet, you are not a man. In the Forbidden City, they whisper behind silken screens and lacquered doors. Servants avert their eyes. Courtiers bow deeply, but their reverence is laced with contempt. Because behind your golden robes lies a secret so grotesque, so humiliating, it will outlive your dynasty. Your voice is high and fragile, your face pale and puffy, but it's what's missing that defines you. You are unable to produce an heir, to fulfill your sacred duty, to even perform the most basic functions of manhood. Because your body was mutilated before you could even speak. You are a puppet emperor, a symbol of power whose own power was carved away in childhood. And as your empire crumbles, so too does the illusion of strength you've worn your entire life. This is the tragic story of power and shame. The crimson banners of the Forbidden City fluttered in the early morning breeze as the procession made its slow approach toward the imperial palace. Thousands bowed in silent reverence, eyes trained to the ground. No one dared look up. No one dared meet the gaze of the emperor, because no one knew what they would see. Behind the veil of gold silk and jade chariots sat a boy, thin, pale, and trembling. He was 14, but his body was frail like a sick child's. His hands were too soft, his voice too light, and his gaze too distant. His name was Hongli, heir to the Qing throne, and though the world called him the Son of Heaven, he was already broken. The eunuchs knew the truth. They had always known. They were the ones who prepared his body when he was still too young to understand. One sharp blade, one muffled scream, one life sentence. A sacred ritual, they called it, a necessary sacrifice to prove loyalty to the empire. But for this boy, it was not a ritual. It was mutilation. He wasn't the first emperor to suffer this fate. In the shadows of Chinese history lay a dark secret. Castration was not only inflicted on palace servants but, in rare and devastating cases, on the emperors themselves. Hidden behind the walls of dragon thrones and silk curtains were stories too shameful to record officially. Emperors who ruled in name but never as men. Hongli's case was different, however. He was meant to be the restoration of dignity, a symbol of the Qing dynasty's strength. But his body betrayed him. As he grew older, the court began to notice the signs. His face remained hairless. His voice never deepened. His mood swung wildly, and he lacked the physical development expected of a man. Medical texts of the era had no language to describe it. They whispered of curses and omens, of karma from past dynasties. But modern science has another name for what afflicted him: congenital anorchia. A rare condition in which a male is born without testicles. In an era obsessed with bloodlines, virility, and celestial duty, it was a curse too deep to bear. The emperor had no genitals, but the empire demanded an heir, so the illusion began. In 18th century China, power was more theater than reality. The emperor was an icon, a godlike being whose every breath was choreographed. His movements were planned. His meals were inspected. His nights, scheduled with consorts who were led to believe they served a virile man. No one could admit the truth, so a fiction was constructed with meticulous care. Dozens of imperial consorts came and went from his bedchamber, and each morning, eunuchs would record imaginary nights of passion. But there were no children, no pregnancies, only excuses. After years of silence, rumors began to echo through the palace corridors. Was the emperor cursed? Was he even a man? The imperial court was split. Some demanded a discreet replacement, a cousin or younger brother who might continue the bloodline. Others pushed for the appearance of continuity, regardless of the truth. To admit the emperor's condition would be to admit weakness. And weakness, in the eyes of rival courts and foreign powers, was more dangerous than disease. Hongli's eyes often lingered on the carved dragons in his chamber, their mouths twisted into snarls, their claws grasping at air. He knew what they symbolized: strength, masculinity, divine rule. But he felt none of it. Behind the ceremonies and scrolls, behind the vows and rituals, he was a ghost. He had the robes of a king but not the body. He had the throne but not the legacy. In secret, he began to write poetry, pages and pages of it, soft verses about rivers, lost cranes, and vanishing seasons. In one surviving fragment, he writes, "The plum tree blooms, but bears no fruit. Winter comes early. The wind is ashamed to speak." These were not the words of a tyrant. These were the words of a man grieving the life he never had. In public, he was stoic, cold, a master of etiquette. But those closest to him, the physicians, the eunuchs, the consorts, knew better. They saw the trembling hands, the sleepless nights, the way he avoided his own reflection in the polished bronze mirrors. And still, the empire demanded heirs. Desperate, ministers orchestrated the adoption of a young noble boy. The child was paraded as the emperor's son, trained in court rituals, and publicly declared the future of the dynasty. But behind closed doors, even the child sensed something was off. The emperor never touched him, never played with him, never called him son. Instead, Hongli would sit in silence, staring at the boy with a mix of longing and fear. What kind of father can a man be when he himself was denied the right to be whole? As the years passed, the truth began to take its toll. Foreign emissaries noticed the emperor's soft demeanor. British and French diplomats recorded their observations in private journals. "He moves with the grace of a lady," one wrote. "Nowhere in sight," wrote another. The cracks in the facade were becoming too large to hide. Inside the Forbidden City, whispers turned to certainty. The eunuchs guarded the truth with fanatical devotion, but rumors spread like fire through silk. Some said he was a hermaphrodite. Others claimed he was punished by the heavens for sins of a past life. A few even dared to suggest that the emperor had been born a woman. The truth was both simpler and sadder. He was a man, but only partially. A ruler, but not in body. A son of heaven, but a prisoner of shame. Puyi sat on a dragon throne carved from sandalwood and jade, wrapped in silks that shimmered like phoenix feathers. But beneath all the gold, the boy's limbs trembled. His crown was too large for his head, his robes too long for his arms. And the throne? It didn't offer comfort, only coldness. He was only a child, crowned emperor at just 2 years and 10 months. As he blinked at the sea of bowed heads, at the eunuchs chanting oaths of loyalty, he didn't understand that his life had been sealed behind palace walls. A symbol, a god, but not free. By now, the truth about his body was whispered by every servant and dignitary in the Forbidden City. The boy emperor had no genitals, a tragic consequence of a childhood surgery gone terribly wrong, or perhaps a punishment from the heavens. Some believed it was karma, others, a royal secret, too shameful to admit. But one thing was certain, this was not a body meant for power. His mother wept in silence. His father avoided his gaze. And the Empress Dowager, the true controller of the court, only smiled with faint cruelty, like a puppeteer admiring her doll. Puyi was never taught how to be a man. He was taught how to be a spectacle. How to bow at precisely the right angle. How to speak without speaking. How to sit motionless for hours, like a porcelain statue. His voice never deepened. His body never hardened. His mind never matured in the way a ruler's should, because his soul had been broken before it could ever form. He was carried from hall to hall by trembling eunuchs. He was bathed in dragon-shaped tubs. He was fed from golden chopsticks. And yet, every night, he fell asleep in a cradle of dread, because no amount of splendor could hide the laughter behind closed doors, the quiet snickering of court officials, the way foreign diplomats shook hands with him as if he were made of glass. Puyi grew up surrounded by fear, not his own, but everyone else's. The eunuchs feared being replaced. The concubines feared aging. The generals feared rebellion. And all feared the day the dynasty would fall. Outside the Forbidden City, revolution had already begun. The Qing dynasty was in its final breaths. The people starved. The banners of warlords waved across the countryside. The very idea of divine rule was being spat upon in the streets. And Pu Yi, this fragile, incomplete boy, was its final torchbearer. But inside the crimson walls, time stood still. Inside, they continued rituals as if the world wasn't changing. The emperor would wake at dawn to rooster calls. He'd be dressed by 6 chamberlains. He'd sip his dew-infused tea. Then he would sit, hour after hour, in silent chambers, doing nothing, ruling nothing, commanding no one. Because in truth, Pu Yi ruled only shadows. His decisions were made for him, his words carefully written by others. And worst of all, his future, stolen. He was surrounded by wives he could never touch, concubines he could never satisfy. He was mocked behind curtains. Rumors spread like wildfire, that the emperor cried at night, that he screamed during examinations, that he wore gowns softer than any woman's. By the time he was 12, Pu Yi had learned to despise mirrors. He would smash them when no one was looking. He would scream in silence. He once tried to take a blade to his own body, but was caught by a eunuch who begged him to live. Because without the boy, they had no reason to exist. And so they coddled him, worshipped him, lied to him, but even lies begin to rot. In 1912, the bombshell came. The Republic had been declared. Sun Yat-sen had risen. And just like that, the Qing dynasty, the last imperial family to rule China, was over. Pu Yi was forced to abdicate. But the court struck a deal. He could remain in the Forbidden City, a ghost emperor in a palace of ruins. A boy king with no country, playing dress-up in a golden cage. Outside, the world spun forward. Inside, the emperor rotted in luxury. He began to retreat into books, English histories, Western science, foreign novels. He watched the foreigners who visited the palace, admiring their modern clothes, their machines, their freedom. One day he turned to a British tutor and whispered, "I want to be like them." But how could he? He could not walk freely. He could not speak his mind. He could not love. And he could not fulfill the one duty expected of any emperor, to father a son. Even among his wives, the tension grew. They shared his chambers, but not his bed. Rumors emerged that he was not only impotent, but perhaps not even a man at all. The palace, once his shelter, became a prison. And the silence, unbearable. One evening, in a fit of madness, he ordered all mirrors removed from the palace. "I will not look upon lies," he said. He stopped attending rituals. He burned his royal robes. And when one of his eunuchs begged him to act like an emperor, he laughed, bitter and broken. "How can I rule a world," he said, "when I can't even rule my own flesh?" By 1924, the final blow came. A warlord stormed the Forbidden City. Pu Yi was cast out like a criminal. For the first time in his life, he stepped onto the streets of Beijing, not as a god, not as an emperor, but as a man with no title, no genitals, no purpose. And yet, his story was far from over. Because sometimes, the fall from grace is only the beginning of something darker. As Pu Yi stepped outside the Forbidden City, he believed he was finally free, free from tradition, from ceremony, from the shame of a throne he never truly ruled. But he had not left the shadows behind. In fact, he was walking into a world that would consume him more completely than any palace ever could. After his expulsion from the Forbidden City in 1924, Pu Yi was moved to a Japanese-controlled area in Tianjin. There, he lived a strange half-life. Neither monarch nor citizen, neither prisoner nor free man. The Japanese treated him with polite cruelty. They gave him luxuries, servants, cars, and Western suits, but never dignity. He was a symbol to them, nothing more. And Pu Yi clung to that symbol with all his might. He wrote letters to foreign powers, pleading to be reinstated as emperor. He practiced signing documents with imperial flourish. He even kept up the illusion of a court. But behind closed doors, he was hollow. He spent his days in paranoia and opium, bullied by the Japanese officers who referred to him as a pet emperor. His shame had now metastasized into obsession. Then, in 1932, came the offer that would forever tarnish his name. Japan had seized Manchuria and wanted to install a puppet government to justify their occupation. They approached Puyi with the offer to become emperor of a new state, Manchukuo. It was everything he had once dreamed: thrones, ceremonies, bowing officials. But it was all smoke. The real power remained in Tokyo. Every word he spoke was scripted. Every move he made was watched. Puyi had become what he always feared: a mannequin dressed in gold. At the coronation of Manchukuo, Puyi stood in elaborate robes, staring into the crowd with dead eyes. Cameras flashed. Foreign dignitaries clapped politely. But inside, he knew. This was not restoration. It was theater. He was being paraded before the world, not as a sovereign, but as a masked Japan wore to commit unspeakable crimes in China. As the years went on, Manchukuo became a dystopia. The Japanese military used it for brutal experiments, slave labor, and resource extraction. Puyi signed documents approving horrific policies. Whether he truly understood what he was signing, or whether he even cared anymore, is unclear. But his complicity sealed his legacy. He tried to resist, sometimes. In private moments, he complained. He asked to make changes, to appoint ministers. But each time, he was reminded that he ruled nothing, not even himself. His shame deepened. And so did the cruelty. Japanese officers often humiliated him behind closed doors. They mocked his voice, his walk, his condition. Rumors circulated about what had been done to him as a boy, how the eunuchs had mutilated him completely to maintain palace purity, leaving him incapable of intimacy or reproduction. Some said he didn't even know how to bathe himself properly. Even among puppets, Puyi was powerless. Then came the war. In 1945, the Soviet Union invaded Manchuria, and Japan's puppet state collapsed overnight. Puyi attempted to flee by plane, hoping to reach Japan. But he was captured by Soviet forces at the airport. His reign, if it could be called that, was over. He spent 5 years as a prisoner of war in Siberia. Gone were the robes, the palaces, the servants. He wore rags, lived in barracks, and dug trenches in the frozen ground. It was, perhaps, the first real life he had ever lived. In the cold wind of the Russian steppe, Puyi began to reflect, not as an emperor, but as a man. He returned to China in 1950, this time as a war criminal. The new communist government imprisoned him in Fushan War Criminals Management Center, a reformation through labor facility. Here, he was forced to confront the consequences of his life: his selfishness, his cowardice, his refusal to face reality. Over years of re-education, Puyi slowly changed. Not entirely, not cleanly, but he began to shed the illusions. He no longer referred to himself as I, the Emperor. He no longer asked for special treatment. He read marks. He scrubbed toilets. He learned to garden. And slowly, the world forgot him. In 1959, Mao Zedong granted him a pardon. Puyi emerged into a country he no longer recognized. The imperial China he once ruled was gone, replaced by factories, red flags, and revolutionary slogans. No one bowed to him anymore. No one cared who he had been. He took a job as a gardener at the Beijing Botanical Garden. Sometimes, tourists would walk past him, never realizing they had just brushed shoulders with the last emperor of China. In his final years, he wrote a memoir, From Emperor to Citizen. In it, he offered glimpses of insight, some moments of remorse. But he never fully opened the door. He danced around the darkest parts: the mutilation, the humiliation, the shame. He spoke of the throne, but not of what it cost him. In 1967, Puyi died of cancer. He was 61 years old. There was no royal funeral, no golden carriage, no dynasty to mourn him. His ashes were stored in a Beijing cemetery, just another name on a shelf of forgotten ghosts. And yet, his story lingers, not because he ruled, but because of how he fell. Puyi was not evil. He was not noble. He was simply hollow. A child dressed in robes too large for him, paraded before history like a tragic ornament. His life was a mirror held up to the illusion of power, the pageantry, the legacy, the shame hidden beneath silk and gold. For all his titles, for all his ceremonies, for all the palace walls built to keep out the world, he died as he had lived, alone, ashamed, and mutilated beyond repair. If this story moved you, reflect on what true power really means. Is it in the title, the crown, or the ability to live with dignity, without illusion? Subscribe for more untold histories that uncover the hidden scars of power. Leave a comment below. What would you have done in Puyi's place? And if you want more stories of empires, tragedy, and fragile humanity, watch our next video. Because behind every crown, there's a cost.